Hey guys, one of the things that I get asked about probably more than anything else is what tackle do I carry on any given trip, and how do I decide what I'm carrying? So I'm just going to give you a quick kind of insight into what I'm carrying. I'm basically finishing up a 4-day shoot. This is what I have on me. This is what I've been carrying, and we're just going to kind of do it off the cuff. So to start off with, I use one of these big Plano boxes to manage all of my lures, and my primary backup stuff is in there. And I do something of like a grab and go. In other words, I take the stuff out of the box that I'm not using, kind of look around at my different boxes, and these boxes will transplant into the mothership, if you will. I keep all of my plastics organized by category in Ziploc bags. Nothing real fancy. It's just a way for me to keep it organized in my mind, so I know what I've got and when I make sure that I have what I need when I get out on the water. So the BlackPak's a great way for me to organize my stuff. And so I've always got my VisiCarbon Pro at the top. That way I can throw that on there if I need it. If I don't, it just stays in my box, but I've always got it on me. It's easy to carry. So I like these waterproof boxes for some of my presentations. If the lures inside them are going to be heavy, then I want to use the waterproof boxes. That way if something ever happens and they end up in the water, the trapped air inside is going to make them float. So let's just take a peek in this box and I'll kind of show you what I've got. This is a top-toed box. You know, I like that top-toed when the bite really slows down, so I keep the hooks that go with them right there, so I can throw this whole box up in the front, stick it under the seat, or put it on the side of my tackle box so I don't have to get completely into the BlackPak. So I'm always frog fishing, and when it starts to cool off and get colder, I want one that I can reel real slow, create some disturbance, but it sits there and hangs in the strike zone. And then I've got a couple of hook boxes. Again, these are heavy because there's a lot of lead in the box, and so I want to use these waterproof boxes so that they're buoyant if something should happen, they fall out of the boat or the kayak should get capsized. But I've got all my tungsten separated. I've got some wacky rigs, some flick shake heads, some little, you know, different type of wacky rig setups, different hooks, and I've got them categorized how they make sense to me. I'll actually do a full-length video on how I categorize my hooks and why, and I keep them in 2 separate boxes. And so this is my primary box with my weights, the hooks that I use the most, my stuff to set up a Carolina rig, and my stuff to fish some wacky and finesse stuff. Got another hook box in here. I'll go ahead and pull that out. And this box is a little bit more universal. It's got some of my swim bait hooks and some of my keel-weighted hooks that I use for doomsday turtles. I use it for some of my smaller swim baits and swimming flukes and things like that. I've got my worm hooks across the top row, all by size. I've got my extra wide gaps and my impulse hooks. I've got my weighted hooks in the corner, and then I've got my oversized worm hooks with the longer shank and the bigger sizes for some of my bigger plastics, especially if I'm going to do some deeper stuff or some stuff where I want that bigger hook for easier hook sets. I have a punching box when I'm doing punching. I keep all that stuff separate, but I walked off and left that on the counter, so I'll show you guys that later when I specifically cover how to set up for punching through thick mats. But this is how I was fishing this week down here. I've got my swim bait box, and believe it or not, sometimes I crisscross my stuff. So I've got this swim box set up, and I just throw a really big crankbait in there. If I get on a good swim bait bite, or if the swim bait bite's not that great, I like to kind of switch back and forth between a swim bait bite and a crankbait bite. And so sometimes I just throw my categorical baits together so I can switch them up. It's a little bit of like a mental thing that says, hey, when the swim bait bite's on, throw the crankbait, or when this bigger crankbait bite's on, make sure you also try a swim bait. So just one of my little mental jogs that I like to do. And then of course I take whatever the predominant plastic bite is at the time, or whatever I expect it to be, and I put all them into one box. And as you notice here, my speed craws, my biospawn, and my culprit baits, the culprit baits are almost empty because it just turns out that for this particular week, this bite, this culprit beetle turned out to be the trick. And so I went through quite a bit of them, and that bite was really big. I think it was because they're just looking for something a little more substantial that looks like a brim or a panfish when you're swimming it. So these smaller baits weren't getting bit as much as the bulky baits were. So I like to put these together in a category. That way they're all in one place. I don't have to dig through a bunch of bags. And especially if the bite's hot, I can just open the box up, grab another one. throw the old ones back into one category and use those later for jig trailers. So that's my plastic box for the day of what I think is going to be the hottest bite. Then I've got a few plastics thrown in here. I'm sorry, a few spinner baits. I always keep my line, so when I get home, I will take this and go through all of my boxes, clean them out, and throw that away. But you don't throw line back in the water. That's a great way for birds and ducks and other things to get entangled. You know, for my bigger spinner baits and buzz baits, I just throw them in this open side, put a couple over on the side, and then I throw these little dividers in there, and the rest of them I just leave out. So that's pretty straightforward. I know it looks a mess, but it works for the way that my mind works. And I absolutely hate spinnerbait boxes because they just turn out to be a mess. I've never found a good one that works great. So this is how I lay my spinnerbaits out. The ones that I do use, I'll lay them on the boat and let them dry, or I use a flow-through box and put them back in there before I clean them up. There's always a map in a Ziploc bag tucked in. I love my Navionics charts. I love my Navionics app, but there's just something more holistic about laying a map out in front of you and being able to see the whole lay of the land. So these waterproof maps, I have a binder at home that I keep these in, and so for the area that I'm going to, grab that map, throw it in the box, throw it in a bag to keep it from getting nasty, and then, you know, the next part is I just Ziploc bags, man. Nothing super fancy. I throw flukes into one bag and swimming flukes. I throw my frogs all into one big bag. I've got my rivets and my zoom horny toads kind of mixed in together, and then I throw the ones that are torn up back at the bottom, and then I use those for jig trailers. In fact, I did a video on that, so just we'll put an annotation here to show you that video on how to use your frogs and other plastics after they're torn up for their primary purpose. You know, reuse them and repurpose them for something else. And then I've always got a worm bag. You know, there's not a bass fisherman out there that's not throwing worms. I like to throw big plastics. I'm a big fan of the Zoom Old Monster, and I'm a big fan of the Culprit. In fact, most of my bigger bass, those not just over 10 pounds, but over 11 and 12 pounds, those bigger bass have come on big Culprit 12-inch worms. It's just something about that big black worm that the bass really like. And then, you know, I said I had all my frogs in that other bag, but it's actually two different types of frogs. The toads that buzz subtle I keep in one bag, and then the toads that bulge and create a little bit more vibration stay in another bag. And when I go down to Florida, I'm always throwing a toad. What I like about this Culprit and Creta frog, it's got these big feet on it, but if you take your clippers and kind of trim the edge off, you can tweak how much gurgle and how much splash that the frog creates. So I really like to use those frogs. Start with the most gurgle and kind of trim it down till I find whatever it is that they want. And then this just kind of found its way out of my fluke bag, so I'll throw that back in the fluke bag. And I keep two different size leader material. These are both Seaguar and VizX. And I like these little nice leader winder things made by Shark Tooth, I believe is the company. You just grab that and kind of pull it off, and it keeps your line nice and clean. And then you just take that and go like that, boop, and it cuts it right off. So that's a good leader keeper tip. I don't know how many times before I found these things, I'd open my box up and leader material be everywhere. Everything in the box would be tangled up with it. I actually have a way to do this on the hood of my kayak. I'll show you guys that in a different video. That's a leader feeder. And so what I do is I put a piece of bungee through there and put it underneath the hood of my Attack, and I've got a grommet that I feed the leader through. That way, if I need to tie on a leader real quick, I just reach up and pull off as much as I need, clip it off, and it's nice and clean and made into the boat. And I've been talking to YakAttack about creating a leader feeder that goes onto the back of the BlackPak. But for now, I just throw whatever the two prominent sizes are. I always buy my fluorocarbon in bulk spools. It saves me money. I know I'm going to use it over the course of time, and so why buy a bunch of the little, you know, smaller packages when I can get the bulk, save a lot of money, never have to worry about running out of line. And for me, with the smaller spools, I always end up with, I use about 3/4 of it, and then there's not enough to fill another reel, but it was too much for one reel. So again, I buy my stuff in bulk, and it just saves me money in the long run. I've always got a frog box, and this is my hollow body frogs. I like to just throw them in a box. One of the things that I do with my hollow body frogs is I put an attractant on it. And as long as the plastics are agreeable, in other words, certain manufacturers, one of those being Z-Man, has something in their plastic that really makes it interact. So I keep my my hollow body frogs, which are a really expensive investment in your hollow body frog collection. You throw this in the pack with your other plastics, and especially if you throw the wrong kind of plastic in with the wrong kind of plastic, you're gonna end up with a big glob of melted together plastic. So this is another product, this is another box that I choose, the waterproof kind with that seal, because if I happen to put it in the back of the truck and it gets hot out and those fumes start to be released from the plastics that do interact, then I want these in a waterproof box that is gonna keep them safe, and I'm not gonna have $75 worth of frogs turn into a big plastic blob. And then last but not least is I keep a couple swim baits in a bag. When I really go down to that subtle, I call it power finesse. They want something moving, but they want something small. I like to throw these really small swim baits. And then, of course, I've always got some jig heads, some shaky head setups. I like these brush jigs where I can make my own jig, add plastic to it, add a skirt if I want the skirt. Zoom horny toads and culprit and credit frogs cut down. And actually, the tail off of a swim bait, after the head tears up, cut the head of a swim bait off, thread it onto that, and it just makes a great thing to swim through a treetop. Bass absolutely destroy it. And these little stand-up spot remover jig heads, these things right here with the tail end of a trick worm, after your trick worms tear up, just cutting it in half and putting the small end on there and then just hooking the hook into the side of it is just a great way to catch bass. So, I mean, there it is, guys. That's a peek into what I actually have on a trip. This isn't something that I set up. This isn't me laying the table out in front of you trying to put my best foot forward. This is a look into my BlackPak after a 4-day trip. This is about as unorganized as it gets at this point. I'll tell you, back in the beginning, I used to have stuff stuck everywhere in trash bags. Every time I got ready to go fishing, I had to tear through everything to find it. Now I can tell you where every tackle box is. I've got stuff by categories. If the shad bite's on, I can grab all my shad stuff. If the worm bite's on, I can grab all my worms. If the fluke bite's on, I can grab all my flukes. And so it's just a method to the madness. And I think if you organize your stuff like this, you'll find more success, because if it takes you 2 hours to get your stuff ready to go fishing and you've only got 3, you'll talk yourself out of going. Keep your stuff ready to go, stay ready to go, and you don't have to do what I call running the gauntlet. That's going home, getting your stuff together, convincing your significant other that you can go. Stay armed and ready. You'll catch more fish. Hope this helps. Comment below. Make sure that you like the video if you liked it. And do me a favor and subscribe. And we'll try to keep sharing these little tips and tactics that hopefully help you catch more fish. Subscribe right there at the bottom.